Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this month's digital workshop. It's titled 9 Ways to Maximize Your Retirement. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Desiree Hozak. I have been with the Leonard Advisory Group team now for, well, coming up in September, it'll be 5 years. So I'm glad to be with all of you here today. Now, Josh will be covering 9 ways in which you can maximize your retirement. Please feel free throughout the presentation to schedule a call with him to answer any questions or general inquiries. He'll be happy to help you with that. But before we get started, we're required to disclose some information. So that'll be coming up on the screen for you to take a look at. Okay, I know that was so interesting there. So we'll get moving on. Now, just in summary, Josh is a financial advisor. The Leonard Advisory Group, we're not employed by the federal government nor the Social Security Administration. We're not CPAs nor estate attorneys. However, we do partner with them to help you achieve your goals. And we're here to help you with your financial planning and your retirement needs. So as for Josh, he's very knowledgeable at what he does. I've been working with him now for the past several years, and I consider him a friend more than a coworker. And he's my second set of eyes, I'm his second set of eyes, and we work together well. And he's always there to help me with it. It might seem like a stupid question, but with these computers, I am not techie, but every time I ask him for help, he always explains it in easy terms and I understand. And spreadsheets, yeah, he's really awesome at that too. So, well, without further ado, I want to leave us off to Josh.
All right, thank you, Des. We will go ahead and get started here. As Des mentioned, today we are doing our 9 ways to maximize your retirement plan. And from the emails and that little promotional video and the plug that I did in the last one, today we want to cover the basics. So I'll give you the highlights in 9 ways. And just like the 2 gentlemen in the coffee shop that we talked about, one really just cared if he was okay or not, and the other one was interested in more advanced planning strategies. So the first half of today's presentation, I'm going to run through and cover the basics. And then the second half, we'll talk through a little bit more of the advanced techniques there. And if we have time, we can talk through some individual situations. If you guys have questions along the way, feel free to throw them in the chat function, and I will do my best to answer them throughout. This beautiful looking French press here is a new coffee maker that I got a few months ago. Now, I arrived at getting this because I wanted something sleek looking if it was sitting out all the time in a new part of our house. And I don't know that much about making coffee. I just drink it every day and I enjoy coffee, but I'm no advanced coffee brewer or anything like that. So I went and asked one of my friends, Seth, hey, if you wanted something sleek looking and simple and a nice way to make just a couple cups of coffee, what would you do? And he sent me this French press and said this would be, the ideal way to make it. Well, last week I was out of town in Pittsburgh, and I realized I'm the only one that has made coffee in our household with this. So my wife said, you got rid of the coffee maker. You only have this weird looking thing. What do I do with it? So I had to go through and explain to her how to do it. And I found actually 2 great ways to do it. One, type out an endless amount of information and send it to her via text message. And then I looked on the company's website and they had a simple graphic explaining how to make it. So then I sent her that as well. When I arrived back home Sunday, I asked her, "Hun, which one did you actually use?" And sure enough, she preferred the simple graphic. So today we're going to cover 2 different areas. We'll make coffee the simple way and coffee the complex way, so to speak. So as I discussed here, we are going to discuss those 9 ways to maximize your retirement plan in the first section. The second section, we're going to take a deeper dive. So talk in a little bit more detail about some of those strategies. So that might be the section that puts you to sleep. And if we have time, we'll talk about how some of these strategies can work together. Today, we're going to talk about things all over the board. So bear with me here. But again, always want to throw in the reminder that a comprehensive retirement plan includes 5 different areas. So the first would be an income plan. The second would be an investment plan. The third, a tax plan. The fourth, a health plan. And the fifth, a legacy plan. We're actually going to touch lightly on all of these today. So take some notes. We'll recap and kind of talk how each piece talks into each one at the end. So starting in the first section, the first would be taking the appropriate amount of risk. So many times we'll meet with families and they're allocated really, really aggressively and they've been happy because the stock market's been doing really well. Well, then the market starts to change and well, they're not quite as happy. So we want to make sure that we're taking the appropriate amount of risk. And one of the ways that we do that in a simplified manner is to have a risk number. So we use a tool called Riskalyze. And any of you that are clients that are on the webinar today, you'll be familiar with the exercise as we have definitely used it with you in the past. But I will send a link out here to Riskalyze. If you haven't taken a risk questionnaire before, this will go through and assign a simple risk number from 1 to 100 that will show you how comfortable you are with taking risk. Then what we can do, if you so choose, is plug that in with your current holdings and see where you actually stand versus where you would wish to be. So I also have up here, don't assume that what happened recently will always be true or that recency bias. Many times, like now, tech stocks have been doing really well for a long time. Well, that might not be the case for the next decade ahead. So we need to be careful and stay diversified. So again, tools like your risk number are a simplified tool to know the amount of risk that you have on a score from 1 to 100. We also find it informative for many of our clients and prospective clients that we meet with to talk about what might happen if a time like 2008 were to happen again. So a large downturn in the stock market, but one that is also a little bit longer than what we saw during March of 2020 with the initial COVID shutdowns. The next is having safe money, but not lazy money. So lazy money or money that we can't really worry about what it's earning should be about 3 to 6 months in savings. So this is our safe money, money that if the water heater goes or the roof starts leaking, we can address those emergency expenses right away. Lazy money would be money in excess of that that's not earning anything. So we want money in excess of what we absolutely need for emergencies to be earning something. And lazy money can just be that excess money sitting in a bank account. We know right now that savings rates are so low that that money is in no way keeping anywhere close to inflation. So we want that money to be earning something while ideally staying fairly liquid and safe at the same time. We don't want that safe money to be all invested in stocks because if we need it, maybe we decide to buy a camper or an RV and start traveling, we'd like to be able to liquidate that money. We need to have a separate bucket of money for those types of expenses. So the second way to maximize our retirement plan is to not have all that money in a savings account. Maybe we'll look at some alternatives that earn us a little bit more interest. The third is going to be taking advantage of QCDs. A QCD is a qualified charitable distribution. And what this does is once you reach age 70 and a half, when you're subject to RMDs, you can take that money directly from your IRA and send it to the charity. That way, we are not incurring that taxable income. It removes it from your taxable income because that money went directly to the charity. If you instead take the money, put it in your pocket, and then write a check to the charity, you have to qualify for that charitable deduction. And with the higher standard deductions that we have now, most Americans aren't. So the second is to take, or the third tip here is to take advantage of QCDs or qualified charitable contributions or distributions, rather. The fourth is going to be gifting stock or stock gifting. Many times we have clients with adult children that they're giving money to help them to still get started or help them pay rent, cover some of their expenses, things like that. If you're giving money to kids, Well, it might be beneficial to look at gifting some of your highly appreciated stock. So maybe you worked for an employer or inherited some stocks long, long ago, and the stocks are worth a ton of money, and you've thought about selling them, but I don't really want to pay the capital gains on that. Well, depending on how much you're giving to your kids and how much they're earning, you might actually be able to gift that money to them or gift those stocks to them. They would then sell the stocks and not actually pay capital gains. So it wouldn't complicate your tax situation. You can also use this as a way to give money to charities prior to age 70 and a half. So the last point here with QCDs, this only comes into play after you've reached the age 70 and a half. So, if you are looking to give to charity in a more tax advantaged way, we can also look at an after tax account in which you're holding stocks. We can look at gifting those to the charity. Works the same way as the kids. The charity would pay taxes on those gains since they're since the charity is a non-taxable entity, it wouldn't actually pay the taxes, thus enabling you to actually give more to the charity. So again, this number 4 is for those of you that have highly appreciated stocks. The next one that we're going to look at here is Roth conversion. So this is talked about a lot, and we talk about it in a lot of client meetings and a lot of presentations. And maybe you're sick of hearing about Roth IRAs, but it's important, especially now when we're thinking, most Americans believe, and if you aren't on the same page as me, go ahead and throw it in chat. But I think we're going to be in a higher tax environment in the future, right? Our national debt is the highest that it's ever been, and we seem to be really good at adding to it. So if we're in a higher tax environment in the future, we may want to pay taxes on that money now and not delay it further. It can also help us once we get to age 72 and we have required minimum distributions. Or, in other words, Uncle Sam says, hey, you got to take money out of your IRAs and 401ks. Many times, those that were really good at saving have actually saved in excess of what they'll need. So, when they're forced to take those distributions, it actually bumps them up into a higher income tax bracket. So, a Roth conversion could be beneficial there. And it also works as a hedge against higher future tax rates. By developing that tax free bucket, you can help manage your tax rate in the future as well. The next one is going to be watching out for IRMAA. These are income related monthly adjustment amounts. So, this picture is actually from Hurricane Irma, slightly different thing. But if you get the letter saying that they're going to be adjusting your Medicare Part D or Part B and Part D income, it might feel like this. Um, these these letters come and they'll tell you, hey, you're going to end up paying a lot more for your Part B and D. And the reason that you get this letter is that because your income 2 years prior was high enough to qualify for these hires. So what we want to do if we get that letter is complete the form SSA 44 in most cases to say, hey, you know what? I was working during those years, or maybe I received a severance package during those years. I want to petition for a lower monthly premium. And if you're fortunate, um, they will grant that to you and you'll end up paying less. Now, moving forward, though, we always need to be careful if we're looking at things like Roth conversions that we don't push ourselves up into a higher paying category unknowingly for Part B and Part D. In some scenarios, it makes complete sense to just say, hey, we're going to pay the extra premium, but we need to have the tax plan built around that and bring that into consideration. The seventh here is going to be knowing 10-year inherited IRA rules. So if you inherited prior to the end of 2019, you're able to take a pseudo RMD, or you can take distributions throughout your life. You're not forced to liquidate the account very quickly. Um, that's what we used to call a stretch IRA. Those are no longer available. And for many times, that we've met with clients or talked with prospects that have recently inherited an IRA, they're unaware of that change in the rules. So if you inherited the account after 2019, so if you had, let's say, a parent pass away maybe last year, you have to withdraw all of those funds within 10 years. So we need to be aware of that, because what might happen if we're unaware of that is we might be forced to withdraw the lump sum in that 10th year or face steep tax penalties. If you inherit a Roth IRA from a parent after 2019, you also must distribute that within 10 years. Now, it's not a taxable event, but you would still have to take the money out of that Roth wrapper over that 10-year time period. So that's something to keep in mind. There's also some strategies that you can look at building into that by saying, hey, if I can keep money here for 10 years, maybe I want to keep it in that Roth wrapper and grow it aggressively over that 10-year time period to get the most out of that tax-free money. The next is going to be having a Social Security plan. Um, Social Security is something that we all pay into each and every year. And many times, um, people just assume that it's best for them to take it right upon retirement. And that's not always the case. We also sometimes hear people say, oh, I'm just going to claim it right at retirement at age 6, or right as soon as I can at age 62. Depending on if you're still working or not, you might end up paying back those benefits. So having a Social Security plan can mean considering deferral. Consider pushing out taking that payment, maybe even past your retirement date, but never past age 70. Also, you need to be aware of spousal benefits. Might you be able to um, get a benefit off of your spouse's earnings record, especially if you stayed at home and didn't work enough to qualify for Social Security? Make sure that you're taking a spousal benefit, which would be, if you wait till full retirement age and your spouse does as well, half of their benefit. We also like to remind people that exes have benefits whenever it comes to Social Security. So you can take, um, excuse me, you can take Social Security based off of your ex's earnings record. Now, you will have need to be married to that individual for at least 10 years. If you have multiple ex-spouses that you are married to for at least 10 years, you would take from the highest earning of those multiple spouses. If you're a widow or widower, you also are able to claim Social Security as early as age 60. So make sure that you're aware of that, especially if you are retired early. That can be a great income source a little bit sooner than many people typically think about Social Security. And the last, so the ninth way to maximize your retirement plan is going to be making the most of HSAs. Now, many of you have HSAs at work, and you're probably contributing something to them. Maybe your employer is as well. Um, they're a fantastic account, often overlooked. The cool thing about HSAs is you put the money in without paying taxes on it. The money can grow without you paying taxes on it. And as long as you use it for qualified medical expenses, you can withdraw money without any tax. So, what's what we call a triple tax-free account. It is one of the most advantageous accounts to have because it allows you to build up a piggy bank of health savings. Many people are unaware or haven't looked into the options of investing that money. For most of us, we put money in and we take it back out as we have medical expenses throughout the year. Maybe we have something left over. I want you to think of it in a different way. We could maximize our contributions during our working years and then in retirement use that health savings account. Well, as a health savings account, we could use that account if we have larger than expected expenses, or we could use it to help pay for our supplement plans as well. One piece that is often missed is as long as we keep track of health expenses that we didn't use HSA dollars for, we could withdraw that money later down the line. So maybe you live a long life, and at age 80, you've never taken money of that HSA, and let's say it's a couple $100,000, but you have a whole big box full of receipts of all the money that you've paid for health expenses over the years. You could withdraw that money from the HSA as long as you have the backup saying that you had health expenses related to that in the past. So the ninth tip here on the high level, just breezing through them, is making the most of HSAs. Does anyone have any questions on those 9 tips that we ran through pretty quickly there? I see we do have quite a few people on here, a couple people on the phone as well. So if you jump in chat, you can throw in any questions on those 9. If not, I will start moving on to the next section and dig a little bit deeper into these. All right. Well, jumping into the deeper dive. So, taking an appropriate amount of risk. I shared with you the Riskalyze link um, that runs through, and that gives you a high level. It gives you a risk number that associates your portfolio or your desired portfolio with a simple number. Now, if we want to go deeper in this and say, okay, well, a number is great, but might that be overly simplified? Yes, I think it could. So, when we think about taking an appropriate amount of risk, we should do an annual risk test if we really want to do a deep dive and make sure that our opinions aren't changing about risk over time. For many clients that we've met with at the beginning of this year, they're rethinking the way that they view risk after the market has been a little bit more challenged. We also should have 3 to 10 years in safe assets if you are in retirement. So you say, Josh, 3 to 10 years, that's a really broad range. Well, I would say that's based on your other income sources, your comfort with risk as a whole, and what other expenses you might have coming up, and your flexibility. So if the stock market's down and you say, hey, you know what? If the stock market's down, I'm just not going to go on vacation that year. Well, then we could be a little bit more aggressive in the portfolio. If you say, hey, you know what? I am going on vacation no matter what, because I've worked the last 40 years to get to this point. Well, great. Then we should make sure that we have enough money and safe money to be able to do that. We use another tool that I have up here. It's Morningstar's X-ray tool to take a deeper look at that allocation. What we can do with the X-ray tool is zoom in to see like what really do we own. So we can look at bonds, we can see how long the average maturity is on those bonds. We can see the equity style. So are we too highly allocated to large cap growth stocks or small cap stocks? What is our blend there? How much do we have in cash? How much do we have in stocks, bonds, international stocks, and where's our concentration? So right now, um, there's a lot of concern, of course, in Russia and the Ukraine and spots in uh, China and issues with Taiwan there as well. So maybe you say, hey, you know what? That seems a little extra risky at this point. When we look at this X-ray that we have up here, we can see in Asia as a whole, we have less than 10% of the portfolio allocated there. If we look at Greater Asia, including Japan and Australia, only about 13% of the portfolio. Um, we can look at different sectors as well. So we can say, hey, I'm worried about the real estate market and the subsequent businesses connected to it. Well, we can see in this portfolio, there's only about 2% in real estate currently. So this would be what we call an X-ray report. If you are looking for this sort of level of report and digging really deep into where your assets are allocated, maybe taking a deeper look at your bonds. I know right now, in a rising interest rate environment, we want to be careful with what bonds we own. I recently was reviewing a client's portfolio that has a lot of money in long-term bonds. Well, at this point, long-term bonds are probably not going to do super well in the short term just because we're in a rising interest rate environment. Those longer durations mean that they're going to be impacted more by rising rates. So if you want to run an X-ray report, I just popped a link into chat to schedule a 15-minute call. If you indicate on that call that you want to do that, we can talk through the steps on how to build out an X-ray report for you and look at the details of your portfolio. Okay, so going to the second way to maximize your retirement savings, having safe money, but not lazy money. So as we talked about before, 3 to 6 months in savings. Ideally, we want to be keeping up with inflation with any money outside of 3 to 6 months in savings. Now, this last year, that's really a challenge. Interest rates are at ultra low rates, zero, in fact. So How do we possibly keep up with inflation if it's somewhere around 7%? Well, one way is to use I bonds. And if we look at I bonds now, they're yielding around 7%. In April, they'll uh, redeclare that rate. So it could possibly go lower. Um, but inflation bonds are one way that we could sort of combat that. There are some rules with liquidity there. CDs could be another way. In today's environment, CDs are not doing super well, but as rates tick up a little bit higher, we'd see those and high yield savings accounts also get higher as well. The next one I have listed there is multi-year guaranteed annuity. So we could look at guaranteeing a fixed rate annuity maybe for 3 years in an account like this. So we know that we're keeping the money safe, but earning a little bit higher. Some of those rates, anywhere between 3 and 5 years today, are 2 to 3%. So certainly better than a savings account. Certainly not as high as that inflation number that we're seeing for the last year. But again, earning something on that money, not making it completely lazy like this dog in the picture where it's just sleeping. The last one I have listed up here is cash value life. So life insurance with a cash value. Depending on how the policy is built and the rules in that policy, you may be able to withdraw the money out without any tax implications and also be able to get a higher rate of return than we would see in a checking or savings account. So we want to make sure that we have enough safe money, especially if we're looking at having some uh, bigger expenses in the next group of years, or if you're in retirement covering that 3 to 10 year time period. We want to keep money safe, and try to earn something with it without taking on too much risk. So moving on to the third point, taking advantage of qualified charitable distribution. So again, you have to be age 70 and a half to do this. Um, you're limited to the amount of that would be taxed as ordinary income. So if you have any um, very old contributions with tricky tax rules around them in an IRA, that would not be included. The maximum amount you can take out in 1 year using a qualified charitable distribution is $100,000. If you're married, your spouse could also take out $100,000. In that scenario, you're donating $200,000 to charity. Um, that would be a very rare case from our view. So most of our clients would tend to think of it as there is no maximum. What most people do with a qualified charitable distribution is they say, hey, you know what? I have a pension, I have Social Security or other income sources. I need to take this money out starting at age 72 for a required minimum distribution. So rather than taking that money out and paying taxes on it, I'm going to use that as my contributions to the church and the other charitable organizations that we normally contribute to. That way, we're avoiding the taxes there. Um, if you contribute to an IRA too, it'll work against the deduction there. So you can't take it out and put it back in and get a tax deduction for it. It doesn't work that way. There are certain charities that don't qualify, like private foundations, supporting organizations, or donor advised funds. So if you are looking to offset a large tax liability by putting some money into a donor advised fund, you couldn't later then contribute more to that donor advised fund using a QCD. Um, it's considered a supporting organization. It needs to go direct to a charity. Digging a little bit deeper into stock gifting. So in stock gifting, here we want to really focus on highly appreciated stocks. We want those to go direct to the individual charity or family member. We don't want to sell those in our own portfolio and then give them away. So the most common circumstance that we have in advising clients would be that a client has maybe stock from an employer or inherited stock that they've held for a long time. They've been afraid to sell that stock over the years because, well, we don't want to pay that 15% capital gains. If we think about it in terms of our Social Security or our Medicare as well, we want to be careful that we're not bumping our income up too high in retirement as well. So when we look at, hey, where's our money going? If it's going to kids or charities, we could look at gifting some of that stock away and never having to realize those 15% capital gains. If you have highly appreciated stocks and you're looking for some strategies to maybe get rid of those, or you're concerned because, well, you don't want to realize the capital gains, but they've become such a large part of your portfolio, go ahead and click on the link I just put up for a 15-minute call. We can discuss your situation a little bit more in some ways that we might be able to offset that tax or gift that liability away for you. Again, I want to remind you that when you're gifting it to charity or maybe even a family member directly, if they're not paying that 15% taxes, that's a net 15% more to that cause or that individual rather than that money going to Uncle Sam or you actually having to net give more money to get to the same gifting limit. So, this is a really, really great strategy. Uh, let's look at Roth conversions. And two things to keep in mind with Roth conversions is there is a 5-year rule. So if you do a Roth conversion, you should plan to just not touch the money for 5 years. The easiest way to think about it. There's a lot more complexity to the rule, but if you do a Roth conversion, it should be for money that you're not planning to touch for 5 years or greater. It also makes sense from the perspective that to get the most out of the Roth conversion, we want that money to grow as well. There is no limit for the amount you can do a Roth conversion as well. The problem is that we have to pay tax on it. So if we convert our whole IRA or Roth IRA, it could very well push us up into the top tax bracket. So we want to be careful there at the dollar amount and think about it in a thoughtful way. Now, I'm going to look at a scenario here where we deposit $10,000 as a 35-year-old and we let the money go. And I know most of you on here are definitely older than 35, but just follow with me here. You put $10,000 in, and let's say that that $10,000 earns 9% compounding all the way up until retirement. That $10,000 actually became $144,618. So that's a huge growth. Now, what you saved in taxes was on $10,000. Maybe at age 35, you weren't earning quite as much as you were at age 65. So let's say maybe you were in the 20% tax bracket, or, most likely probably the 10% tax bracket. So at most, you'd save maybe $1,000 in taxes. Well, here is the painful part is once you do retire at age 72, you're going to have to start taking distributions. Now, at that time, let's say that this account now is only growing at 5%. So it's slowed down in that growth. It's earning money, but remember at age 72, we have to take those RMD withdrawals. We have to start pulling money out of the account. These RMDs are shown here in this column. In this scenario, we're going to assume that this person passes away at age 85. In that case, they've taken $141,933 out. There's $186,525 left, or the total taxable amount is $457. If we averaged paying 20% tax on that, that would be over almost $66,000 in taxes. Let's draw a different scenario. What if instead we did a full Roth conversion at age 66? Even if that pushed you up into a 24% tax bracket on that full Roth conversion on this account, you would pay $34,708.32. So this is an overly simplified example, but we can see that really our tax savings initially on this IRA contribution and that growth over time causes us to have a pretty big tax liability, almost $66,000 on an initial $10,000 that we contributed. If we do the Roth conversion now, we can stem against some of those taxes. And this also would help you if tax rates go higher in the future as well. So something to keep in mind, one way to think about Roth conversions in a little bit more detail to help you figure out what might be an appropriate amount for you to do a Roth conversion, if it makes sense. We're going to use this to transition to watching out for IRMAA. So we also have to be careful, like in that situation we just talked about, in converting to Roth IRAs, that we don't cause our Part B or Part D to become more expensive. In 2022, our baseline premium for Medicare Part D is $170.10. Now, if you're married filing joint and your income is $182,000 or less, that's all you'd pay for Part B. Now, if your income is above that, 182,000 all the way up to 228,000, you'd pay $238.10 per month. We can see these brackets go all the way up. So if you're married filing joint, the highest is at $750,000 or above, you'd pay $578.30 per month. Or if you're single, that's at $500,000 or above. So we want to be careful of that when we're looking at Roth conversion strategies, or maybe it's just even withdrawing money for a down payment for a second home or doing some work on a home. Part D works the same way. So if our income's higher, we're going to pay more on a monthly basis. The lowest tier here is that 182,000 or less. If you're married filing joint, you'll only pay the plan premium for Part D. The cheapest one now is just under $8 per month. So not much cost there. If you work up in the tiers, you'd pay that $12.40 per month in the next tier up, plus your plan premium, all the way up to $77.90 a month. So when we think of this in terms of planning, we just look at this as another tax. Really, it's going to fall into your healthcare expenses, but we look at it as a break-even point when viewing any tax strategies like Roth conversions. I have been talking quite a bit. If anyone has questions, please make sure that you throw them in to the chat function. I'll throw in a link for a 15-minute phone call as well, talking through, the watching out for IRMAA and the Part B and Part D. Many times we'll see some opportunities there to help out clients, as I mentioned in the simplified version of the slide with that SSA 44. It's a really great feeling to get a letter saying, hey, we have reconsidered and now we're going to charge you less for your Medicare Part B, or Part D. So if you have received that letter, make sure you schedule a 15-minute call. I can help walk you through that form to see if you might qualify. The form, if you just Google search SSA 44, it's pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward. If you qualify under these conditions, you fill it out, send it in. Not always the most prompt response, and sometimes the wires get crossed a little bit, but if you're patient, it can save you a bunch of money. Moving on to our 7th point, knowing the 10-year inherited IRAs. Again, we want to be careful there when we're inheriting funds that we're following the rules. We don't want to miss anything. And sometimes it can throw off a carefully crafted income plan. If we have an income plan and we've structured your income that you have guaranteed income sources, pensions, Social Security coming in, and that's enough. And then all of a sudden you get an additional, let's say $100,000 inherited that now you need to take within a 10-year time period. Well, that can throw your income plan off and cause you to pay more in taxes. So building enough flexibility into your plan, if you think that you might be inheriting assets, can be a huge advantage. Or, like I said, with that Roth IRA, maximizing that 10-year time period to get the most growth out of it and then withdraw it at the end of that 10-year time period. Keep in mind, a Roth IRA, even inherited from a parent, is still tax-free. You just have to distribute it within 10 years, assuming you inherited that asset after 2019. So if you're inheriting that asset, let's say it's $100,000, you're able to get 10%, or you're able to double the asset. Let's just say you're able to double the asset in a 10-year time period. That $200,000 is now tax-free. So you were rewarded by waiting that 10-year time period and distributing it at the end. Conversely, the IRA is going to continue to be taxable. So if that is aggressively invested again, and that $100,000 IRA doubles to be $200,000, well, now you owe taxes on $200,000. So you may want to start withdrawing that sooner, or make it a more conservative piece of your portfolio. If you inherit an IRA and you're still working, but retirement is maybe 3 to 4 years away, you want to build that into your income plan so that is sort of your first bucket of income that you're withdrawing in retirement. So you're not forced to take it all in that 10th year. Having a Social Security plan. As I mentioned previously, we want to make sure that we're maximizing our spousal benefits. We want to know the options for spousal filing. Um, in general, the higher earner must be at least 66, claimant must be at least 62. We can no longer file and suspend. Um, that was a prior strategy where we could get a little bit more out of the system, but that was revised back in 2015. We do want to make sure that we know options if we're divorced. We want to get the most out of any prior marriages. If you had multiple marriages for 10 years or greater, we want to make sure that we are claiming on those benefits as well, especially if it's higher than yours. If you are a widow or widower, make sure that you're aware that you can start claiming at age 60. You can also file a restricted application and allow your own benefit to grow. In other words, you can claim off of the deceased spouse's benefit and let yours grow. So a little bit more details here. The divorcee benefits, we'll start on the right-hand side here. Bear with me for one moment here, folks. All right, here we go. So divorcee benefits. If you are divorced, you are married for at least 10 years, you can take up to half of your ex-spouse's full retirement amount if you take benefits at your full retirement age. Again, you have to be married for at least 10 years. And once an ex-spouse remarries, so if you're the ex-spouse and you remarry, you're no longer eligible to receive a benefit based on their earnings history unless you then get divorced again. But again, if you get married, then you'll be eligible for a spousal benefit under your new spouse's earning records. If you're a widow, you can take benefits as early as age 60. If you remarry after age 60, your survivor benefits are unaffected. So that is a big difference between divorcee and widower and widow benefits. Uh, if you're a widow or widower, you're able to use that even if you get remarried after age 60. Last piece in Social Security planning, you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of deferrals. If you are able to, if your financial plan is such that it's strong enough that you can defer past your full retirement age, as long as you were born after 1943, which I'm pretty sure everyone on the webinar today is, that benefit's going to grow at 8% per year. Again, from full retirement age until age 70. Doesn't make sense to defer any longer than age 70, but if you're married, that would lock in the highest possible payment if we use the higher or the higher earners earnings record. That would lock in the highest payment for life. So we encourage you to defer as much as you can, unless of course you don't think you're going to live very long. If we look at deferring till age 70 or maximizing that 8% deferral, typical break-even point is right around age 83 and a half. So this past weekend, we celebrated my grandmother's 95th birthday. In the case of my parents, it will definitely make sense for my dad to defer his benefit as long as possible, ideally age 70. That way, if my mom lives to be age 100, even if my dad passes away, they will get the largest possible Social Security check. Lastly, talk about HSAs a little bit more. If you have an HSA at work, we need to max that out. So even if you're still working and you say, oh, I sit on a lot of your webinars, Josh, but I don't really feel that I need to do that much because I'm not retired yet. And maybe I'm not retiring for 5 more years. I'll show you a quick example of why it makes sense to look at deferring that. So let's say you're age 59 now. We're going to take our maximum contribution for a family with a catch-up contribution of $7,300. We're going to take that $7,300. We're going to invest it each and every year until age 64. Once you go on Medicare, you are no longer eligible to contribute to that HSA, But let's say that you continue on putting money away into that account at 7% or earning 7% a year. We let that money defer from age 64 until we might need it. We're going to get conservative, more conservative throughout the time in which we think we might need it. So if we look here, this column of assumed growth, we'll see at 7% at age 71 becomes a little less aggressive, goes down to 6%. And then at 73, 5% growth. And at 75, we're getting really conservative there, only earning about 3%. Let's say that, like my grandmother, she was actually 95, but let's say that you went into a long-term care facility, or she was 94. Let's say that you go into a long-term care facility at age 90. In this case, you would have built up a bucket of tax-free money to pay for that care of about $312,000. That's pretty good considering you were making those contributions back in your late 50s and early 60s. That has really grown to become a true health savings account. Now, let's keep in mind of something else that would be a common question here. What if you're age 85 and you decide, heck with it all, I'm not going into a nursing home. I just want to spend this money. As I mentioned before, if you have saved receipts over the years and you can show that at least you had 269,000 in health expenses, you can withdraw all that money and not pay taxes on it as well. So if you can, it makes a lot of sense to max out those HSA contributions and save that money along the way. We are definitely past our 40 minutes here, as tends to happen on these webinars. I know that we covered a ton of information and a ton of details. I hope that you can see how all these little tidbits can fit into a comprehensive retirement plan. In talking about our income planning, we want to make sure, again, in the risk profile, that we have enough safe money for 3 to 10 years. When we're investing funds, we want to make sure that we're not taking too much risk, that if the market pulls back, we don't act negatively and maybe sell everything, sit in cash a little bit too long, and we don't recover from those. In our tax plan, well, we want to make sure that we're optimizing that tax plan so that we don't pay too much to Uncle Sam. In our health plan, well, we want to be careful that we're not paying too much in Medicare premiums, that we have a bucket saved up for potentially some long-term care expenses later on in life, and also that we are transitioning onto Medicare and getting the best plan for us. Lastly, our legacy plan. We didn't necessarily talk about it through this lens, but we can also think about our inherited IRA rules as a way to optimize for our children. If our children are earning really, really good money as well, and they're set to maybe inherit a portion of an IRA or 401k from you being their parents, we want to be careful that Uncle Sam's not getting a larger piece of it. In that case, it may make sense for you to do Roth conversions so that they're not forced to pay additional money in taxes or potentially bump them up into a higher tax bracket. I'll finish up with a quick story here about a Band-Aid. A couple weeks ago, my son Eli got his second COVID shot. And I'm really not convinced if he is more fearful of the shot or taking the Band-Aid off the next day. He seems to have a ton of anxiety around taking off Band-Aids. You know, it hurts a little bit, but if you just rip it off, it goes off really easily. I think some people think of financial planning as the same way. You've done all this stuff for so many years where you've saved money in your 401ks, your IRAs, and you figure, I got money, I'm just going to withdraw from it. Well, if we optimize it, if maybe we put a little bit of water or some adhesive remover on that Band-Aid, man, we can make that transition a lot better and we can get a lot more out of that as well. So if you haven't already, I encourage you, if you're not working with us, or if you are working with us and have questions, to schedule a 15-minute call. If anything I covered today raised more questions than it did provide solutions. If you see an opportunity for you to do a little bit of additional planning, or maybe you're considering Roth conversions, or you're looking at saving some more money in your HSA, or you want to take a deeper look at your allocation, just schedule a 15-minute phone call. Even if you're an existing client and you feel like we may have talked about this recently, you are more than welcome to schedule that call. I'd be happy to address any concerns. I know, especially with the way the market's been lately, people have been very worried. So I'd be happy to talk through those with you. I thank you all for joining today, and thank you, Desiree, for providing a nice intro for me at the beginning of this webinar. Keep an eye out for an invite to our next webinar. And as always, if you have any suggestions that you'd like to see for certain topics in the future, shoot me an email, let me know. I'd be happy to set up a webinar later this year for that. This year, we are planning to continue doing these monthly. So keep an eye out. I'm sure we'll be covering topics that are helpful to you. Thank you, everyone.